The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Alara pushed through the hospital room door, her newborn baby cradled against her chest. The smell of disinfectant couldn't mask the tension that filled the air like smoke. Her husband Darian sat propped up in the narrow bed, still wearing that ridiculous hospital gown that made him look smaller somehow. Vulnerable. She'd rehearsed this moment 100 times during those long nights when he was working late again. When the baby kicked and she had no one to share the wonder with. When she ate dinner alone, staring at his empty chair. But now, standing here with their daughter finally in her arms, the words felt like broken glass in her throat. "I brought someone to meet you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the steady beep of his heart monitor. The baby stirred, tiny fingers grasping at nothing, and Alara's heart cracked a little more. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. New babies were supposed to bring families together, not tear them apart. Darian's eyes found the bundle in her arms, and something shifted in his face. Wonder, fear, love. All the emotions he'd been too proud to show for months. But Alara couldn't let herself hope. Not anymore. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. With her free hand, she reached into her purse and pulled out the manila envelope. The papers inside represented months of sleepless nights, lawyer consultations, and the hardest decision she'd ever made. She placed the envelope on his bedside table with a soft thud that sounded like thunder in the quiet room. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. What's this? Darian's voice came out rough, like he already knew but couldn't bear to hear it out loud. Divorce papers. The words fell between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that would change everything. I need you to sign them. The color drained from his face. His hands, which had been reaching toward the baby, froze mid-air. Those same hands that used to trace hearts on her back when she couldn't sleep. That used to hold hers during scary movies. That slipped a ring on her finger 3 years ago while promising forever. Alara, what are you talking about? We just had a baby. Our baby. His voice cracked on the last word, and she almost wavered. Almost. That's exactly why I'm doing this. She shifted their daughter to her other arm, creating more distance between them. She deserves better than what we've become. Better than the silence. Better than the fights. Better than parents who can't even look at each other without seeing everything that went wrong. The baby made a soft cooing sound, oblivious to the world falling apart around her. Darian's eyes locked onto those tiny features, Alara's nose, his stubborn chin, a perfect blend of their broken love story. His mouth opened and closed like he was drowning in air. You can't be serious. You're tired, you're emotional, you just gave birth. You're not thinking clearly. But even as he said it, his voice lacked conviction. They both knew this had been building for months. I've never been more clear about anything in my life. Alara's voice grew stronger, fed by all the lonely dinners and empty conversations. I won't raise her in a house where love died from neglect. Where her parents are strangers who happen to share a last name. Darian finally reached for the envelope, his fingers trembling. The papers rustled as he pulled them out, scanning the legal language that would dissolve their marriage like sugar in rain. His name was there, waiting for his signature. Her name too, already signed in her careful handwriting. When did you do this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Last week. While you were at that conference in Denver. The one you didn't tell me about until the night before. She watched him flinch at the accusation. I sat in our empty house, feeling the baby move, and realized I was already a single mother. The heart monitor's beeping seemed to quicken, matching the chaos in his chest. He looked from the papers to the baby to Alara's face, searching for any sign of the woman who used to laugh at his terrible jokes, who used to leave love notes in his lunch bag, who used to believe in them. But her expression was granite now, carved by too many disappointments and hollow promises. She'd built walls around her heart, and he was finally realizing he'd handed her every brick. "I know I've made mistakes," he started, but she cut him off with a shake of her head. "This isn't about mistakes, Darian. It's about choices. And you chose everything else over us. Over me. Over this." She gestured to their daughter, who was beginning to fuss, sensing the tension in her mother's arms. He stared at the signature line, a black void waiting to swallow 3 years of marriage. His pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. How had they gotten here? When did their love story become a cautionary tale? The room fell silent except for the baby's soft whimpers and the relentless beeping of machines keeping someone else alive down the hall. Outside, life continued, nurses making rounds, visitors bringing flowers, new families being born into hope instead of heartbreak. But in this room, time had stopped. A man held papers that would end his marriage while his newborn daughter reached for a father who might be about to disappear from her life forever. Would he sign the papers and let them go? Or would he fight for the family he was only now realizing he'd already lost? 5 years earlier, the library smelled like old books and new possibilities. Darian sat hunched over his economics textbook, highlighter in hand, when a folded piece of paper slid across his table like a secret. He looked up to find a girl with wild curls and paint-stained fingers walking away, her messenger bag bouncing against her hip. The note was written in purple ink. "You've been reading the same page for 20 minutes. Maybe you need coffee more than calculus." He glanced around the silent library, heart hammering against his ribs. She was already 3 rows away, pretending to browse the poetry section. Her shoulders shook slightly. Was she laughing? The boldness of it made his chest tight with something he couldn't name. No one had ever noticed him like that before. No one had ever cared enough to break the rules of library silence for him. That night, he left his own note tucked in her favorite study spot near the philosophy books. "Coffee sounds perfect. But only if you promise to tell me why you carry paintbrushes in a book bag." Their first date happened by accident. She was waiting by the campus coffee cart when the sky opened up, dumping rain like the world was ending. They ran for cover under the nearest awning, which happened to be the old chapel everyone said was haunted. Lightning lit up the stained glass windows, casting rainbow shadows across her face. "I'm Alara," she said, water dripping from her curls. "And you're the guy who doesn't know when to turn the page." "Darian. And you're the girl who breaks library rules." He handed her his jacket, watching her eyes widen with surprise. Such a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. Like crossing a bridge he could never uncross. They talked until the storm passed, sharing stories and dreams and the kind of secrets you only tell strangers you hope won't stay strangers. She wanted to paint murals that would make people stop and think. He wanted to build businesses that would employ entire towns. Different dreams, but they both burned with the same fire. Their second date was planned. Their third was inevitable. By winter break, they were inseparable, leaving notes in each other's textbooks like breadcrumbs leading to forever. She drew hearts in the margins of his business plans. He bought her expensive brushes she was too afraid to use because they were too beautiful to waste. "You know what I love about you?" she asked one night, curled up next to him in his tiny dorm room. Snow was falling outside the window, and her voice was sleepy with contentment. "What? You see the world like a puzzle, and you actually believe you can solve it. Most people just accept the broken pieces." She traced lazy circles on his chest. You make me believe I can solve it too. Those words became his anchor. When professors doubted his ideas, when his father said business was too risky, when the world felt too big and complicated, he remembered how she looked at him like he was capable of anything, like he was worth believing in. Their love grew in coffee shops and late-night study sessions, in stolen kisses between classes and weekend adventures to nowhere special. She taught him that life was meant to be painted in bright colors. He taught her that dreams needed blueprints to become reality. Spring semester brought job interviews and graduate school applications, the future pressing against them like storm clouds. Other couples were breaking up, unable to handle the pressure of real life approaching. But not them. They made plans over pizza and cheap wine, mapping out a future that felt as solid as the ground beneath their feet. "We could get married after graduation," he said one night, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I mean, if you wanted to. If that's something you'd ever consider." She went perfectly still, and for a moment he thought he'd ruined everything. Then she smiled, that slow, devastating smile that had been undoing him for months. "Are you asking me to marry you over pepperoni pizza in a dorm room that smells like dirty socks?" "Maybe." His voice cracked like a teenager's. "Is that terrible?" "It's perfect," she whispered, and kissed him like she meant it. Like she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to ask her that exact question in that exact terrible, wonderful way. But even perfect moments cast shadows. As graduation approached, doubt crept in like smoke under a door. His classmates talked about entry-level salaries and student loans, the grinding reality of adult life. Her art professors warned about the financial struggle of creative careers. Late at night, when she was asleep beside him, he'd stare at the ceiling and wonder if love was enough. If two kids with big dreams and empty bank accounts could really build the life they'd drawn in coffee shop napkin sketches. He never told her about those doubts. That was his first mistake, though he wouldn't realize it until much later. Instead, he held her tighter and made promises he hoped he could keep. But love was supposed to conquer everything, wasn't it? That's what all the songs said, what all the movies promised. Two people against the world, unbeatable as long as they had each other. If love was truly enough to overcome anything, why did those late-night doubts feel like prophecy? The wedding happened on a perfect October day when the leaves were showing off and the air tasted like apple cider and possibility. Elara had wanted something small, intimate, real. No fancy venue or designer dress, just the people who mattered most and vows that came from the heart instead of a website. They chose the old barn on her grandmother's property, the same place where she'd spent summers painting watercolors and dreaming of her future. White string lights hung from the rafters like captured stars, and mason jars filled with wildflowers lined the aisle. Everything was handmade, personal, touched by love instead of money. Darian waited at the makeshift altar, hands shaking as he straightened his tie for the 100th time. His best man, Jake, kept making jokes to calm his nerves, but nothing could slow the hammering in his chest. This was really happening. In a few minutes, Elara would be his wife, and their real life would begin. Then the music started, not the traditional wedding march, but the song that had been playing in that coffee shop during their first real conversation. She appeared at the end of the aisle in a simple white dress that caught the light like morning mist, her grandmother's pearl necklace at her throat. Her father walked beside her, pride and sadness mixed in his weathered face. But Darian only saw her. The way she moved like she was dancing to music only she could hear. The smile that started small and grew brighter with each step toward him. The tears in her eyes that matched the ones burning in his own. When she reached him, her father kissed her cheek and whispered something that made her laugh. That wonderful musical laugh that had been pulling him closer for 3 years. Then her hand was in his, warm and steady, and the world narrowed to just the two of them. The ceremony was a blur of promises and tears and kisses. They'd written their own vows, words they'd practiced in mirrors and whispered to each other in the dark. His voice shook as he promised to build their dreams together, to choose her every day for the rest of his life. Hers was clear as she vowed to paint their love story in colors that would never fade. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister said. And suddenly they were kissing, and everyone was cheering, and rice was flying through the air like confetti made of wishes. The reception lasted until dawn. They danced to songs from every era, their families mixing and mingling like ingredients in a recipe for happiness. Alara's art school friends taught Darian's business buddies how to swing dance. His grandmother shared embarrassing stories about his childhood, while her cousins planned elaborate practical jokes. The best moment came near midnight when the crowd had thinned and the music had softened. They were swaying together in the middle of the barn, her head on his shoulder, both of them exhausted but too happy to care. "No regrets," he whispered into her hair. "Only that it took us this long," she whispered back. They honeymooned in a cabin by the lake, 3 days of complete isolation from the world. No phones, no internet, no responsibilities except to each other. They cooked breakfast together every morning, took long walks through the woods, made love like they were trying to memorize each other. On their last night, they sat on the dock watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and orange. Alara had brought her sketchbook and was trying to capture the moment, but she kept getting distracted by the way the light caught his profile. "I want to remember this forever," she said, pencil moving across the page in quick, sure strokes. "The way you look right now. The way I feel right now. Like anything is possible." "It is possible," he said, pulling her closer. "We're going to have the most amazing life. Big house, successful careers, beautiful kids running around causing chaos. The whole American dream." She leaned into him, breathing in the scent of his cologne mixed with lake air and campfire smoke. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me we'll never stop being us. That success and stress and all the things that happen to other couples won't happen to us. Promise me we'll always be the people who left love notes in library books." "I promise," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "We're different. What we have is different." Their first apartment was tiny but perfect, a one-bedroom walk-up with creaky floors and a kitchen the size of a closet. Alara painted one wall bright yellow because she said it made the space feel like sunshine lived there. Darian built shelves from scratch, proud of every crooked angle and uneven surface. They were broke but happy, eating ramen noodles and splitting dollar menu burgers while planning their empire. She waitressed at a trendy cafe downtown while working on her portfolio. He started at the bottom rung of a marketing firm, determined to climb every step. Their first year of marriage was a montage of stolen moments and shared dreams. Dancing in the kitchen while dinner burned. Falling asleep tangled together on their second-hand couch. Sunday mornings that stretched into afternoons, lazy and warm and perfect. They celebrated every small victory like it was monumental. Her first commissioned painting. His first client presentation. Their first real grown-up dinner party where they served wine in actual wine glasses instead of coffee mugs. "Look at us," Alara said one night as they cleaned up after friends had left. "Acting like real adults who know what we're doing." "Fake it till you make it," Darian laughed, pulling her into his arms for a dance to the music still playing softly from their ancient stereo. But even then, there were hints of the cracks that would eventually split them apart. The nights when he stayed late at work, chasing promotions that seemed always just out of reach. The mornings when she woke up alone, his side of the bed already cold. They told themselves it was temporary. Just until he got established, just until her art career took off. Success required sacrifice, and they were building something beautiful together. The late nights and missed dinners were investments in their future. If they could see what was coming, the slow drift, the silence, the way love could suffocate under the weight of ambition, would they have chosen differently? The promotion came with a corner office and a salary that made Alara's eyes widen when Darian showed her the offer letter. They celebrated at the fancy restaurant downtown, the one they'd always walked past but never entered because the menu prices made their student loan payments look reasonable. "We made it," he said, raising his wine glass in a toast. "Finally, we can stop worrying about money and start living." But living, it turned out, meant Darian worked 60-hour weeks and brought stress home like takeout containers. Messy, overwhelming, and hard to clean up. The corner office came with corner office problems, and the salary came with the expectation that he'd earn every penny twice over. Alara tried to be understanding. This was what they'd planned for, what they'd dreamed about during those ramen noodle years. Success was supposed to feel different though. Lighter. Instead, it felt like drowning in slow motion. She'd wake up at 7 to find his side of the bed empty, sheets already cold. A hastily scrawled note on the kitchen counter would explain he had an early meeting, an important call, a crisis that couldn't wait. The coffee maker would still be warm, evidence that he'd been there, but it felt like loving a ghost. Their conversations became logistics meetings. Who would pick up the dry cleaning, whose turn it was to buy groceries, when they could squeeze in dinner with their parents. The deep talks that used to stretch for hours were replaced by efficient exchanges of information, love reduced to a shared calendar app. "I miss you," she said one night when he finally came home at 9:30, takeout bag in hand and exhaustion written across his face like a billboard. "I'm right here," he replied, not looking up from his phone where emails were already pulling him back to work. "No, you're not." The words hung in the air between them, sharper than she'd intended. "You're physically here, but the rest of you is still at the office." He finally looked up, saw the hurt in her eyes, felt the familiar stab of guilt that had become his constant companion. "I know. I'm sorry. It's just this Henderson account is about to close, and if we land it, the commission alone will pay off your student loans." Money. Always back to money. As if that was what she was asking for, what she was missing. She wanted to explain that she'd rather eat ramen forever than share a bed with a stranger, but the words felt too big, too desperate. Instead, she smiled and kissed his cheek, tasting obligation instead of affection. The pregnancy news should have changed everything. She'd planned it perfectly. Candlelit dinner, his favorite meal, the little gift box with the positive test inside. She'd imagined his face lighting up, his arms wrapping around her, promises whispered about the family they were finally going to create. Instead, he went pale. Completely, utterly pale. "Are you sure?" he asked, staring at the test like it might change its mind. "Pretty sure." 3 tests worth of sure. She tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. "I know we talked about waiting another year, but sometimes life has other plans." "Good plans." He nodded, said all the right things about being happy and excited and ready. But she saw the panic in his eyes, the mental calculations already starting. Bigger apartment, health insurance upgrades, college funds, all the financial responsibilities that came with tiny human beings. That night, he held her close and whispered about their future child, but she could feel the tension in his body. The way his breathing never quite settled into sleep. The way he kept checking his phone even in the dark. The first trimester was lonely in ways she hadn't expected. Morning sickness that kept her home while he worked longer hours to prepare for the financial impact of the baby. Doctor's appointments she attended alone because his schedule couldn't accommodate anything that wasn't billable hours. She started talking to the baby during those long afternoons when the apartment felt too quiet and her body felt too strange. whispering stories about the father who was working so hard to provide for them, even though providing felt a lot like abandoning. "Your daddy loves us," she'd say, hand on her growing belly. "He's just forgotten how to show it." The second trimester brought energy and hope. She threw herself into nesting, painting the spare room in soft yellows and greens, assembling a crib from instructions that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. Each kick from the baby felt like a promise that everything would work out, that love would find its way back to them. But Darian grew more distant, not less. The bigger she got, the more overwhelmed he seemed. As if her changing body was a countdown timer to a responsibility he wasn't sure he could handle. Their conversations became stilted, careful. She'd share updates about the baby's development, and he'd nod and smile and ask appropriate questions. But it felt like performance art, both of them playing roles in a story they'd forgotten how to write. The fight that broke them happened on a Tuesday night in the 7th month. He'd missed another prenatal appointment, the one where they were supposed to discuss birth plans and choose a pediatrician. She'd sat in the waiting room watching other couples hold hands and make decisions together, feeling like a fraud pretending to be half of a team. "I can't keep doing this alone," she said when he walked in at 10:15, tie loosened and eyes already apologetic. "You're not alone. I'm here, I'm working my ass off for us, for the baby. Everything I do is for this family." "No, everything you do is for your career. There's a difference." The words came out louder than she'd intended, months of frustration finally finding their voice. "When's the last time you asked me how I'm feeling? When's the last time you put your hand on my belly and talked to your child? That's not fair. You know how stressful things are right now. The Peterson merger, the quarterly reports, they—" "Stop." She held up her hand, tears already starting. "Just stop making excuses. I'm growing our child inside my body, and I feel like I'm doing it completely alone. You've become a stranger who pays the bills." The doctor's office became Alara's second home during the final weeks of pregnancy. Every appointment was a solo performance. Her answering questions meant for two people, making decisions that should have been shared. The nurses stopped asking where her husband was after the third or fourth visit, their pitying smiles more painful than direct questions. She kept a journal for the baby, writing letters about all the things happening that Daddy was missing. The hiccups that kept them both awake at night. The way her belly button had turned inside out, which she found hilarious and slightly horrifying. The strange dreams where she could already see tiny fingers and perfect toes. "Your dad is working really hard right now," she wrote in purple ink, the same color she'd used for that first library note years ago. "He thinks providing means being away, but I wish he understood that being present is the most important thing he could provide." The apartment felt different now, heavy with expectation and the weight of unspoken words. Darian came home later each night, as if he was afraid of what he might find. Her growing belly was impossible to ignore, a constant reminder of the responsibility approaching like a freight train. Their conversations became even more careful, polite exchanges between people who used to share everything. She'd update him on the baby's progress, and he'd nod and ask follow-up questions that felt rehearsed. They were like actors who'd forgotten their lines, improvising their way through scenes that used to come naturally. The nursery was finished, painted and decorated with love and hope and growing desperation. She'd assembled everything herself, YouTube tutorials becoming her best friend as she figured out cribs and changing tables and the mysterious contraption called a diaper genie. Each completed project felt like a small victory and a larger defeat, evidence of how alone she'd become in creating their child's world. 3 weeks before her due date, Darian got promoted again. Vice President of Strategic Development, a title that came with even longer hours and even greater pressure. They celebrated with takeout Chinese food eaten in silence, the fortune cookies offering more conversation than either of them could manage. "This is good for us," he said, reading his fortune twice before sharing it. "For the baby. Financial security is the most important gift we can give our child." She wanted to scream that presence was more important than presents, that a father's time was worth more than a bigger bank account. Instead, she smiled and agreed, swallowing words that would only start another fight neither of them had the energy to finish. Labor started on a Thursday morning while Darian was in Chicago closing a deal. She called him between contractions, her voice tight with pain and fear and the strange excitement that comes with knowing everything is about to change forever. "It's time," she said when he answered on the fourth ring, city noise and important conversations competing with her voice. "Time for what?" "Ilara, I'm in the middle of a presentation. The baby is coming." Another contraction hit, stealing her breath and making her double over in their kitchen. "I need you to come home. Now." The silence stretched across the miles between them, filled with the sound of her breathing and his sudden understanding. She could hear him making excuses to someone, the rustle of papers being gathered, the quick click of heels on marble floors. "I'm coming. I'm on my way. Just breathe, okay? Remember what we learned in that class." But they'd never taken a class together. She'd gone alone, practicing breathing techniques with a pillow while other couples supported each other through mock contractions. She made it to the hospital in a taxi, calling her mother between waves of pain that felt like her body was trying to turn itself inside out. The nurses were kind but busy, treating her like one of dozens of women who gave birth every day, nothing special or unique about her situation. Hours passed in a blur of pain and breathing and waiting. She labored alone, counting contractions and watching the door for a husband who was probably still 30,000 feet in the air. Her mother arrived first, then her sister, creating a circle of support that felt both comforting and heartbreaking. Darian burst through the door just as the doctor was saying something about transition and pushing soon. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled from the airplane, his eyes wide with panic and guilt and love all mixed together. "I'm here," he said, rushing to her side and taking her hand. "I'm so sorry. I'm here now." But even his presence felt complicated, tainted by all the times he hadn't been there, all the appointments missed and conversations avoided. She squeezed his hand anyway, needing his strength even as she resented his absence. The baby came at sunset, screaming and perfect and impossibly tiny. Amelia Rose, named for Ilara's grandmother and the flowers that had decorated their wedding. She had Darian's dark hair and Ilara's stubborn chin, a perfect blend of two people who'd forgotten how to blend their lives together. Holding her daughter for the first time, Ilara felt love expand in her chest like helium, lifting her above all the hurt and disappointment of the past months. This tiny person was everything good about their relationship, everything worth fighting for, everything they'd created when they still believed in forever. Darian cried when he held Amelia, tears streaming down his face as he whispered promises about being the best father in the world. About never missing another important moment. About putting family first from now on. But promises made in hospital rooms often dissolve like sugar in the harsh light of everyday life. And Ilara had heard too many promises lately that sounded beautiful but felt empty. 2 days later, she was discharged with instructions about feeding schedules and warning signs and the importance of rest. Darian had already returned to work, unable to take paternity leave during such a crucial time for his career. She gathered her things and her baby and prepared to go home to an apartment that felt more like a way station than a destination. As she buckled Amelia into the car seat, her daughter's eyes opened wide, staring up at her with the kind of trust that felt both precious and terrifying. This little person was depending on her for everything: love, security, protection from a world that could be cruel and disappointing. Sitting in the passenger seat of her sister's car, Alara made a decision that had been building for months. She wouldn't raise her daughter in a house where love was conditional, where presence was negotiable, where promises were just pretty words without substance. Some fights were worth having. Some lines were worth drawing. And some loves were worth protecting, even if it meant walking away from the people who'd forgotten how to cherish them. But would she have the courage to follow through when the moment came? And would Darian finally understand what he was losing before it was too late to save it? The breaking point came on a Tuesday night when Amelia was 3 months old. Alara sat in their bedroom, feeding their daughter while rain pelted the windows like tears the sky couldn't hold back anymore. The apartment was dark except for the soft glow of the nursery lamp, and silence wrapped around them like a blanket that couldn't quite keep out the cold. Darian was in Denver again. Another conference, another deal, another reason why work came before family. He'd left that morning with a kiss on her forehead and a promise to call before bedtime. But bedtime had come and gone, and her phone stayed silent while their daughter needed her father. This wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd whispered promises to her unborn child. This wasn't the family she'd dreamed of during those early days when love felt strong enough to conquer anything. Instead, she was a single mother in everything but name, married to a ghost who paid the bills but never came home. The lawyer's business card had been sitting in her dresser drawer for 2 weeks, hidden under old letters and forgotten jewelry. Patricia Coleman, family law attorney. Her sister had given it to her after watching Alara break down in the grocery store when a stranger asked where her husband was and she couldn't answer without crying. "Just in case," her sister had said. "You don't have to use it. But you don't have to suffer alone either." That night, after Amelia finally fell asleep, Alara pulled out the card and stared at it until the numbers blurred. Her fingers trembled as she dialed, not sure what she would say, not sure she was ready for the conversation that would change everything. "Coleman Family Law, this is Patricia." The voice was warm, professional, understanding in the way that comes from hearing too many stories like Alara's. "Hi, my name is Alara Morrison. My sister gave me your number. I think I need help." The words came out in a rush, like she was afraid she'd lose her nerve if she spoke too slowly. "What kind of help do you need, Alara?" "I think I want a divorce." Saying it out loud made it real, made it something that couldn't be taken back or pretended away. "I have a 3-month-old baby, and I feel like I'm already a single mother. My husband works all the time, and I don't think he wants to be married anymore. I don't think I want to be married anymore either." The consultation happened the next week, while Darian was in Seattle and Amelia napped in her stroller beside Patricia's desk. The lawyer was younger than Alara had expected, with kind eyes and a way of asking questions that didn't feel like judgment. "What are you hoping to achieve?" Patricia asked, taking notes on a yellow legal pad that looked too ordinary for something so life-changing. "I want my daughter to grow up seeing what love actually looks like," Alara said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "Right now, she's seeing 2 people who live in the same house but barely speak to each other. I don't want her to think that's normal. I don't want her to accept that kind of love when she's older." Patricia nodded, writing something down. "And have you tried marriage counseling? Mediation? Sometimes these situations can be resolved without divorce." Alara laughed, but it came out bitter instead of amused. "You can't counsel someone who's never home. You can't mediate with someone who thinks working 80 hours a week is the same as caring for his family." The papers took a week to prepare. Custody arrangements, asset division, all the legal language that reduced 3 years of marriage to bullet points and dollar signs. Alara signed them in Patricia's office while Amelia gurgled happily in her carrier, oblivious to the way her world was about to change. "Are you sure about this?" Patricia asked, watching Alara's pen hover over the signature line. I'm sure I can't keep living like this. I'm sure my daughter deserves better. Whether that makes me sure about divorce, I guess we'll find out. The manila envelope sat on their kitchen counter for 3 days, waiting for the right moment. Ilara practiced what she would say, how she would explain that this wasn't about anger or revenge, but about love. About choosing to protect what was left of their family before resentment destroyed it completely. But the right moment never came. Darian was either working late or exhausted from working late, and every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. They'd forgotten how to talk to each other about anything that mattered, their communication reduced to logistics and polite requests. On Thursday, he got the call that would change everything. The Henderson account, the big one he'd been chasing for months, wanted to meet. But there was a problem with his presentation, some technical issue that required him to fly to their headquarters immediately. I have to go to the hospital for some tests, he said, throwing clothes into a suitcase with the efficient speed of someone who lived out of luggage. Nothing serious, just some chest pain that won't go away. Probably stress. Chest pain. Ilara looked up from feeding Amelia, concern cutting through her frustration. Darian, maybe you should see a doctor here. Maybe you should slow down. I can't slow down. Not now. This deal could set us up for life, Ilara. Really set us up. I can see a doctor after we close. He was gone an hour later, leaving behind the scent of his cologne and another empty promise to call. But this time felt different. This time, Ilara knew it might be the last time she watched him choose work over family. That evening, she called the hospital in Chicago where he was supposed to be staying. Room 412, he'd said. When they connected her, a nurse answered instead of Darian. Mr. Morrison is sleeping right now. He had some kind of episode during his business meeting. Exhaustion, the doctor thinks, combined with high blood pressure and anxiety. We're keeping him overnight for observation. An episode. Her husband had collapsed during a business meeting, and she'd found out from a stranger. He hadn't called her, hadn't asked her to come, hadn't even told her he was actually in the hospital instead of just having tests done. That night, Ilara made a decision that felt like jumping off a cliff into dark water. She packed the divorce papers in her diaper bag, booked a flight to Chicago, and arranged for her mother to watch Amelia. If Darian was going to be in the hospital anyway, they were going to have the conversation that could no longer wait. Some conversations couldn't happen over the phone. Some truths required looking into someone's eyes. And some endings needed to be spoken face to face, with all the love and sadness and broken dreams laid out between them like cards in a game nobody wanted to play. The flight felt like traveling toward the end of the world. But maybe sometimes the end of one world was the beginning of another, better one. Maybe sometimes love meant knowing when to let go. Would seeing him vulnerable and afraid change her mind? Or would it finally give her the courage to save what was left of their family by setting it free? The breaking point came on a Tuesday night when Amelia was 3 months old. Ilara sat in their bedroom, feeding their daughter while rain pelted the windows like tears the sky couldn't hold back anymore. The apartment was dark except for the soft glow of the nursery lamp, and silence wrapped around them like a blanket that couldn't quite keep out the cold. Darian was in Denver again. Another conference, another deal, another reason why work came before family. He'd left that morning with a kiss on her forehead and a promise to call before bedtime. But bedtime had come and gone, and her phone stayed silent while their daughter needed her father. This wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd whispered promises to her unborn child. This wasn't the family she'd dreamed of during those early days when love felt strong enough to conquer anything. Instead, she was a single mother in everything but name, married to a ghost who paid the bills but never came home. The lawyer's business card had been sitting in her dresser drawer for 2 weeks, hidden under old letters and forgotten jewelry. Patricia Coleman, family law attorney. Her sister had given it to her after watching Alara break down in the grocery store when a stranger asked where her husband was and she couldn't answer without crying. "Just in case," her sister had said. "You don't have to use it. But you don't have to suffer alone either." That night, after Amelia finally fell asleep, Alara pulled out the card and stared at it until the numbers blurred. Her fingers trembled as she dialed, not sure what she would say, not sure she was ready for the conversation that would change everything. "Coleman Family Law, this is Patricia." The voice was warm, professional, understanding in the way that comes from hearing too many stories like Alara's. "Hi, my name is Alara Morrison. My sister gave me your number. I think I need help." The words came out in a rush, like she was afraid she'd lose her nerve if she spoke too slowly. "What kind of help do you need, Alara?" "I think I want a divorce." Saying it out loud made it real, made it something that couldn't be taken back or pretended away. "I have a 3-month-old baby, and I feel like I'm already a single mother. My husband works all the time, and I don't think he wants to be married anymore. I don't think I want to be married anymore either." The consultation happened the next week, while Darian was in Seattle and Amelia napped in her stroller beside Patricia's desk. The lawyer was younger than Alara had expected, with kind eyes and a way of asking questions that didn't feel like judgment. "What are you hoping to achieve?" Patricia asked, taking notes on a yellow legal pad that looked too ordinary for something so life-changing. "I want my daughter to grow up seeing what love actually looks like," Alara said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "Right now, she's seeing two people who live in the same house but barely speak to each other. I don't want her to think that's normal. I don't want her to accept that kind of love when she's older." Patricia nodded, writing something down. "And have you tried marriage counseling? Mediation? Sometimes these situations can be resolved without divorce." Alara laughed, but it came out bitter instead of amused. "You can't counsel someone who's never home. You can't mediate with someone who thinks working 80 hours a week is the same as caring for his family." The papers took a week to prepare. Custody arrangements, asset division, all the legal language that reduced 3 years of marriage to bullet points and dollar signs. Alara signed them in Patricia's office while Amelia gurgled happily in her carrier, oblivious to the way her world was about to change. "Are you sure about this?" Patricia asked, watching Alara's pen hover over the signature line. "I'm sure I can't keep living like this. I'm sure my daughter deserves better. Whether that makes me sure about divorce, I guess we'll find out." The manila envelope sat on their kitchen counter for 3 days, waiting for the right moment. Alara practiced what she would say, how she would explain that this wasn't about anger or revenge, but about love. About choosing to protect what was left of their family before resentment destroyed it completely. But the right moment never came. Darian was either working late or exhausted from working late, and every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. They'd forgotten how to talk to each other about anything that mattered, their communication reduced to logistics and polite requests. On Thursday, he got the call that would change everything. The Henderson account, the big one he'd been chasing for months, wanted to meet. But there was a problem with his presentation, some technical issue that required him to fly to their headquarters immediately. "I have to go to the hospital for some tests," he said, throwing clothes into a suitcase with the efficient speed of someone who lived out of luggage. "Nothing serious, just some chest pain that won't go away. Probably stress." Chest pain. Alara looked up from feeding Amelia, concern cutting through her frustration. "Darian, maybe you should see a doctor here. Maybe you should slow down." "I can't slow down. Not now. This deal could set us up for life, Alara." really set us up. I can see a doctor after we close." He was gone an hour later, leaving behind the scent of his cologne and another empty promise to call. But this time felt different. This time, Elara knew it might be the last time she watched him choose work over family. That evening, she called the hospital in Chicago where he was supposed to be staying. "Room 412, he'd said. When they connected her, a nurse answered instead of Darian. "Mr. Morrison is sleeping right now. He had some kind of episode during his business meeting. Exhaustion, the doctor thinks, combined with high blood pressure and anxiety. We're keeping him overnight for observation." An episode. Her husband had collapsed during a business meeting, and she'd found out from a stranger. "Last week, while you were in Seattle closing the Morrison deal." She watched him flinch at the reminder of yet another business trip that had taken priority over their family. "I sat in our apartment, your apartment now, I guess, and realized that I was raising our daughter alone anyway. At least this way, it's honest." The papers rustled in his shaking hands as he flipped through them, scanning custody arrangements and financial responsibilities and all the ways love could be legally dismantled. She'd been generous, probably more generous than her lawyer had advised. She didn't want his money, she wanted her life back. "I know I've made mistakes," he started, but she cut him off before he could launch into the same speech about working hard for their future that she'd heard a dozen times before. "This isn't about mistakes, Darian. It's about choices. Every day for the past year, you've chosen work over us. Over me. Over her." She nodded toward Amelia, who had fallen back asleep, tiny fist curled against her cheek. "And maybe that's the right choice for you, but it's not the right choice for us." The room fell silent except for the mechanical sounds of medical equipment and the weight of everything they'd never said to each other. Outside, Chicago continued its busy life, people rushing to meetings and appointments and all the things that seemed so important until you were sitting in a hospital room watching your marriage die. "What if I changed?" he asked suddenly, desperately. "What if I took time off, spent more time at home, put the family first from now on?" She'd been waiting for this question, dreading it and hoping for it in equal measure. Because part of her, the part that still remembered dancing in their tiny kitchen and leaving love notes in library books, wanted to believe that change was possible. But promises made in hospital rooms were like promises made in the dark. They sounded beautiful but rarely survived the harsh light of everyday life. Would she give him one more chance, or would she choose the painful certainty of ending things over the dangerous hope of trying again? The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a fire that had been burning too long. Darian's eyes searched her face desperately, looking for any sign that his promise of change could undo months of neglect and loneliness. But Elara had heard those words before, whispered in the dark after fights, muttered over coffee on rushed mornings, texted from airports between flights to nowhere she wanted him to go. "You've said that before," she said quietly, her hand instinctively moving to stroke Amelia's soft hair. Their daughter slept peacefully between them, unaware that her parents were deciding the shape of her entire future. "After the Henderson account, you said you'd slow down. After the Peterson merger, you promised things would be different. After your last promotion, you swore you'd put family first." Darian's face crumpled as each reminder hit him like a physical blow. The heart monitors beeping grew faster, matching the panic she could see building in his chest. But she couldn't stop now, couldn't let him make promises he wouldn't keep just to avoid the consequences of all the promises he'd already broken. "Every time, I believed you. Every time, I thought maybe this would be the moment you remembered what mattered." Her voice stayed steady, but tears were starting to blur her vision. "And every time, something more important came up. Some deal that couldn't wait, some client that needed you more than your own family did. This time is different. I'm in a hospital bed, Elara. I collapsed during a business meeting because I haven't slept more than 4 hours a night in months. My body is literally telling me to stop." He gestured weakly toward the 4 in his arm, the monitors tracking his vital signs. "If that's not a wake-up call, what is?" She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe that this time would be different, that fear and exhaustion could accomplish what love and marriage vows couldn't. But wanting something and trusting it were two different countries, and she'd been living in the space between them for too long. "I used to think you worked so much because you loved us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told myself that every late night, every missed dinner, every time you chose your phone over our conversation was because you were building something beautiful for our future." Darian nodded eagerly, seizing on her words like a drowning man grabbing a rope. "That's exactly what I was doing. Everything I've worked for has been for you, for us, for her." He looked at Amelia with such raw love that it made Alara's chest ache. "The house we're going to buy, her college fund, security for when we're old, all of it." "But what about security now?" The question came out stronger than she'd expected, fueled by all the nights she'd lain awake wondering if her husband still loved her, or if she'd become just another obligation on his endless to-do list. "What about the security of knowing your spouse will be there when you need them? What about the security of feeling like you matter more than a quarterly report?" The silence that followed was different from the others, heavier, more final. She could see him trying to find an argument, some way to explain away months of choosing everything else over their marriage. But how do you argue with loneliness? How do you debate the weight of feeling invisible in your own life? "I was there for the important things," he said finally, but even he seemed to know how weak it sounded. "The birth, the hospital visits when she had that fever, your birthday dinner." "You left my birthday dinner early for a conference call with Tokyo." The words came out flat, matter-of-fact, devastating in their simplicity. "You sang happy birthday and then spent the rest of the evening in your office while I cleaned up cake by myself." He closed his eyes, and she could see him remembering that night, probably for the first time really seeing it from her perspective. The way she'd smiled and told him it was fine when he apologized and kissed her forehead before disappearing into work again. "I thought you understood," he whispered. "I thought you knew that everything I was doing was for us." "I did understand. That's the problem." She shifted Amelia to her other arm, needing something to do with her hands besides reach for him. "I understood so well that I forgot I was allowed to need things too. I forgot that marriages require presence, not just paychecks." The admission seemed to hang in the air between them, raw and honest in a way their conversations hadn't been in months. For a moment, she could see the man she'd fallen in love with, the one who used to notice when she was sad, who used to ask about her dreams, who used to make her feel like the most important person in his universe. "What do you need?" he asked, and his voice was different now, stripped of excuses and desperate with genuine curiosity. "Tell me what you need, and I'll do it. I'll be it. I'll change everything if that's what it takes." The question she'd been waiting for him to ask for months, and now that it had finally come, she wasn't sure she had the answer. Or maybe she was afraid she did have the answer, and it was already too late for it to matter. "I need to feel like I married a partner, not a paycheck." The words came slowly, carefully, like she was handling something fragile that might break if she moved too quickly. "I need to know that when our daughter asks about her father, I can tell her about a man who was present for her childhood, not just paying for it. I can be that man. I want to be that man." His voice broke on the last word, and she could see tears starting in his eyes. "I've been so afraid of not being able to provide for you both that I forgot you needed me to just be there. Just be present." Present. Such a simple word, but it contained everything she'd been missing. Not presence, not presence at big events, but the daily, ordinary presence of a partner who chose her every day instead of just on holidays and birthdays. "I want to believe you," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "But belief isn't enough anymore. I believed you the last 5 times you promised to change. I believed you when you said the next promotion would mean more flexibility. I believed you when you said once we were financially secure, you'd slow down." The heart monitor's beeping had slowed to match the rhythm of his breathing, steady but labored, like everything else about their conversation. Outside, she could hear the sounds of evening in the hospital. Shift changes, dinner trays, families gathering around bedsides to share the kind of presents she'd been starving for. Amelia stirred in her arms, making the soft sounds that meant she'd be awake and hungry soon. Real life, with its immediate needs and urgent demands, was about to intrude on this moment of painful honesty. Soon, she'd need to feed their daughter and change her diaper and continue the daily routine of motherhood that Darian had observed from the margins for 3 months. "If I sign these papers," he said quietly, his hand hovering over the documents that would end their marriage, "does that mean I lose both of you? Does that mean I'll never get the chance to show you that I can be the father and husband you need?" The question she'd been dreading, because the answer was complicated and heartbreaking and full of the kind of gray areas that legal documents couldn't capture. Could a man really change? Could love be rebuilt from the ashes of neglect? And even if it could, was she strong enough to risk her heart again, or was protecting what was left of their family more important than saving what was left of their marriage? Alara looked down at their daughter, who had begun to stir in her arms with the perfect timing of babies who sense when adult conversations are reaching critical moments. Amelia's tiny mouth formed a perfect O as she yawned, and for a moment, both parents forgot about divorce papers and broken promises, united in the simple wonder of watching their child exist. "She has your stubborn chin," Darian whispered, his voice thick with tears he was trying not to shed. "And your terrible timing," Alara replied, but there was no bite in it, just the exhausted affection of a woman who had loved this man for too long to simply stop. "She always wakes up right when I need to think clearly." The baby's eyes opened, that unfocused newborn stare that seemed to see everything and nothing at once. She blinked slowly, processing the bright hospital lights and the tension crackling between her parents like electricity before a storm. "Can I hold her?" Darian asked, his voice so quiet it was almost lost in the ambient noise of medical equipment. "Please? I know I don't deserve it, but—" Alara hesitated. This was why she'd brought Amelia along, not as a prop or a manipulation, but because their daughter was the reason for everything. Every decision she made now would ripple through this tiny person's entire life, shaping her understanding of love and marriage and what it meant to fight for the people who mattered. Slowly, carefully, she lifted Amelia from the carrier and placed her in Darian's waiting arms. His hands shook as he cradled their daughter, and Alara had to blink back tears at the way his whole face transformed when he looked down at her. "Hi, baby girl," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Daddy's been such an idiot. Such a complete, terrible idiot." Amelia studied his face with that serious expression babies get when they're trying to figure out if someone is safe, if this person can be trusted with their tiny, vulnerable heart. After a moment, she made a soft cooing sound, and Darian's tears finally spilled over. "I love you so much," he told her, his words coming out in a rush like he was afraid he wouldn't get another chance to say them. "I love you and your mommy more than anything in this world, and I'm sorry I've been so bad at showing it." Watching him hold their daughter, seeing the genuine love and regret in his eyes, Alara felt her carefully constructed resolve begin to waver. This was the man she'd married, the one who'd cried when she'd told him she was pregnant, who'd spent hours researching the best cribs and car seats, who'd painted the nursery himself even though he had no idea what he was doing. But love alone hadn't been enough to keep him present. Good intentions hadn't prevented him from missing appointment after appointment, dinner after dinner, bedtime story after bedtime story. How many times could she forgive the same broken promise before forgiveness became enabling? "She needs you," Elara said quietly. "Not your money, not your grand plans for her future, but you. Your time, your attention, your voice reading her bedtime stories instead of conference call notes." "I know. God, I know that now." He looked up from the baby to meet her eyes, and she saw something there she hadn't seen in months. Real understanding, not just acknowledgement. "I thought providing for her meant working more, saving more, building some kind of financial fortress around our family. I didn't realize I was building a wall that kept me out too." The admission hung between them like a bridge that might either connect them or collapse under the weight of everything left unsaid. Elara felt herself standing at a crossroads that would determine not just her future, but Amelia's understanding of what love looked like. "The papers are still there," she said, nodding toward the bedside table where the divorce documents waited like a loaded gun. "And I meant what I said about not being able to keep living like this. But, hope crept into his voice, dangerous and desperate. "But maybe there's a middle ground. Maybe there's a way to protect our daughter from the marriage we've had while giving you a chance to show us the husband and father you say you want to be." She could see him processing her words, trying to understand what she was offering. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't a promise that everything could go back to the way it was. It was something smaller and more fragile, a possibility. "What does that look like?" he asked, his voice careful, afraid of saying the wrong thing and destroying whatever chance he was being given. "It looks like you taking real time off. Not just a long weekend, but actual leave. It looks like counseling, for both of us, individually and together. It looks like you proving that your promises have substance before I risk our daughter's security on them." The heart monitor beeped steadily as he considered her words, still holding Amelia like she was made of spun glass. Their daughter had fallen back asleep, her tiny hand curled around his finger in the universal baby gesture that could melt even the hardest hearts. "And if I do all that," he said finally, "if I take leave and go to counseling and show up every day for months, what happens then? Do I get my family back? Do we try again?" The question she'd been avoiding, because the honest answer was that she didn't know. 3 months ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. A week ago, she would have said no with equal certainty. But sitting here, watching him hold their daughter like she was the most precious thing in the universe, she realized that maybe not knowing was okay. Maybe uncertainty was better than the false security of a marriage that was already over in everything but name. "I don't know," she said, and the honesty of it felt like stepping into open air. "I can't promise you that doing those things will fix us. I can't promise that counseling will bring back what we've lost. But I can promise that if you don't do them, if you go back to choosing work over family the minute you're discharged from this hospital, then those papers will be filed and will be over for real." It wasn't the answer he wanted, she could see that in his face. But maybe it was the answer he needed. Honest, conditional, requiring him to earn back what he'd taken for granted instead of simply expecting forgiveness because he'd finally recognized his mistakes. "What about right now?" he asked. "Do you take the papers home with you, or—" She looked at the manila envelopes sitting on his bedside table, those documents that represented months of careful planning and painful decisions. Taking them back felt like retreat, like admitting defeat. Leaving them felt like an ultimatum, a sword hanging over whatever chance they might have. "They stay here," she said finally. "Unsigned but not forgotten. A reminder of what we're trying to save and what we'll lose if we can't." The choice was his now, and that felt both terrifying and right. She'd done everything she could to communicate her needs, to set boundaries, to protect their daughter's future. Whether their marriage survived would depend on his actions, not her willingness to forgive the same mistakes over and over again. But was she making the right choice? Was giving him another chance the loving thing to do, or was she setting all three of them up for more heartbreak down the road? Chapter 10. 6 months later, Alara sat in their marriage counselor's office, watching Darian play peek-a-boo with Amelia while they waited for Dr. Martinez to finish reviewing her notes from their last session. The baby giggled at her father's silly faces, her laughter filling the small room with the kind of joy that made even the hardest conversations feel worth having. The man playing with their daughter was different from the one she'd served divorce papers to in that hospital room. Not completely transformed, that would have been impossible, and probably not genuine anyway. But changed in small, daily ways that had slowly rebuilt her trust like sediment forming new ground. He'd taken 3 months of family leave, a decision that had shocked his colleagues and probably cost him the promotion he'd been chasing. For the first 2 weeks, he'd been restless, checking his phone constantly, jumping every time it rang. But gradually, he'd settled into the rhythm of home life, learning their daughter's schedule, taking over the 2 a.m. feedings so Alara could sleep. "How are things at home this week?" Dr. Martinez asked, settling into her chair with the patient expression of someone who'd guided many couples through the wreckage of broken marriages. "Better," Alara said, and meant it. "We had our first real fight since he came home from the hospital. About loading the dishwasher, of all things. But we actually talked through it instead of letting it fester." Darian smiled ruefully, bouncing Amelia on his knee. "I loaded it wrong, apparently." Which seems to be a metaphor for most things in our marriage. "The important part," Dr. Martinez noted, "is that you both stayed present for the conflict instead of one person leaving or shutting down. That's significant progress from where you started." Where they'd started was a marriage so broken that divorce had felt like mercy. In those first counseling sessions, they'd barely been able to look at each other without the weight of accumulated resentments filling the space between them. Alara had been angry, Darian had been defensive, and Amelia had been the only reason they were both still trying. But slowly, painfully, they'd begun to excavate the love that had gotten buried under years of misplaced priorities and unspoken needs. It wasn't easy work. Some sessions left them both emotionally drained, driving home in silence while the baby slept in her car seat. But it was honest work, the kind that actually changed things instead of just making them prettier on the surface. "I've been thinking about something Dr. Martinez said last week," Darian said, his voice careful in the way it got when he was working up to something important. "About how I used work to avoid intimacy, even when I thought I was working for intimacy." Alara nodded, remembering that session. It had been brutal, watching him realize that his constant busyness had been as much about fear as ambition. Fear of not being enough, of disappointing her, of failing at the one thing that mattered most. Easier to succeed at work than to risk failing at love. "I think I was so afraid of not being a good enough husband and father that I avoided actually being a husband and father," he continued. "Which is probably the stupidest logic in the history of human relationships." "Not stupid," Dr. Martinez corrected gently. "Very human. We often avoid the things that matter most to us because the stakes feel too high. But the irony is that avoidance guarantees the very failure we're trying to prevent." Amelia babbled something that sounded almost like words, and both parents turned their attention to her with the kind of shared focus that had become natural again. These moments of connection over their daughter had been the first cracks in the wall between them, small reminders of what they'd created together when love felt effortless. "What's changed?" Dr. Martinez asked. "What's different now from 6 months ago?" Alara considered the question, thinking about the man who now made breakfast while she showered, who read parenting books with the same intensity he used to reserve for quarterly reports, who asked about her day and actually listened to the answer. "He's present," she said finally. Not perfect, but present. When Amelia had that fever last month, he didn't check his phone once during the entire pediatrician visit. When I had that panic attack about going back to work, he held me until it passed instead of trying to solve it with logic. And what's different for you, Darian? He was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Amelia's hair while he thought. I'm not constantly trying to prove something anymore. Before, I felt like I had to earn love through achievement, like my worth was measured in promotions and salaries and deals closed. Now I know that showing up is enough. Being here is enough. The words hit Elara unexpectedly hard, bringing tears to her eyes. This was what she'd been trying to tell him for months, that presence was the gift she'd needed, that all his grand gestures couldn't replace the simple act of choosing to be where his family was. Are you ready to discuss the future? Dr. Martinez asked. We've spent months working on the present, but at some point, you'll need to decide what comes next. The question they'd all been avoiding, the one that hung over every session like weather that might turn dangerous. The divorce papers were still in Elara's dresser drawer, unsigned but not destroyed. A reminder of how close they'd come to ending everything, and how quickly they could find themselves there again. I want to try, Elara said, her voice steadier than she.